It's difficult to forget the gruesome incident in 2015 in which an African asylum seeker was mistaken for a terrorist in a Beersheba bus station following a terror attack. The man was shot by a security guard and then lynched by a small mob, despite only being an innocent bystander. Well, an Israeli court has just delivered a sentence on one of the men involved in that lynching, with some saying that it doesn't even qualify as a slap on the wrist. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the details.
All right, thanks, Aaron. So before I, get to the sentencing here, which the court arrived at by way of a plea deal and admission of guilt, first let's talk about exactly what happened that day. So what went down, it happened in October of 2015 at the height of what Israelis now refer to as, the stabbing intifada. That was a very tense time all over the country. So at this bus station in Beersheba, a Palestinian man had just stabbed and killed an Israeli soldier. He took off into the crowd. In the pursuit, an African asylum seeker from Eritrea, his name is Haftom Zarhum, by the way, he was apparently mistaken as the suspect, presumably because of the color of his skin. After a guard shot Zarhum on the spot, a crowd gathered around his fallen body as he was bleeding out, and that's when an Israeli man, David Muyal, approached the body and then dropped a very large, very heavy metal bench on him and crushing him. And this was followed by more, and someone in the crowd actually filmed the whole thing. I warn you that the content is extremely, it's graphic, it's quite graphic.
Right, yeah. I mean, now as I understand it, the ultimate cause of death here were the gunshots from the security officer. I don't know of any progress in that litigation, or if there even is any progress, but because of that, Moyal wasn't charged with murder.
Correct.
The state initially charged him with a grave intent to cause injury, but then reduced it when Moyal entered a plea of guilty. This brings us to the sentencing, right?
Right, okay. So in the end, he admitted to the charge of abusing the helpless. That's the plea deal. And on those grounds, the court have just given him 100 days of community service, and he'll also have to pay 2,000 shekels to the family of the man who he lynched on that day. That's a little over $550.
All right, so obviously this is a somewhat lighter sentence than what many expected. On the one hand, Moyal and everyone else thought that this was a terrorist that they were stopping. On the other hand, this was not a terrorist, this was a totally innocent man. And even if it were a terrorist, a lynch mob isn't the answer. But still, when it comes to accidents, these acts typically carry consequences, at least consequences worse than community service.
Yes, right. So look, I'm going to try to leave aside the argument that says, this sends a very clear message that the system seems to value one type of life very differently from another. Because let's be clear about something here. Yes, this is a very light sentence, and not just given the nature of the images that you're seeing in this video footage, but in the spectrum of just law in general. So now you're right about something. Accidents do happen. But here's a situation where, okay, maybe the defense can exploit legal loopholes and knock some of those charges down. And yeah, the state can go for that. But here's a man who I think most Israelis would say is a victim of terror, even if it was an indirect incident. But Israel doesn't recognize it as that because he's an asylum seeker and not a citizen of the state. So, typically families whose relatives are killed in terror attacks, they usually get a kind of compensation and benefits from the National Insurance Agency. But this family, which lives in poverty to begin with, they've gotten zero, nothing. And again, I have to remind you that everyone, the victim had a legal visa to be here at the time of his lynching and the time of his death.
All right, well, I cannot begin to understand the family's outrage. How can any family put a price on their loved one? And actually, Zarhum's relatives are apparently currently fighting that very issue in another court case, arguing that if an Israeli had been accidentally killed, all of this would have gone down very, very differently. It's a tough story to revisit, but thank you for the updates, Brett.